And good day, good night. Welcome to Euro Today and Soccer Today. A little bit of both today, best of both worlds. We're not talking about a bad collaboration from the late 90s. We're talking about a combination of Major League Soccer and European Championship talk. We're going, of course, break down the quarterfinals of the Euro in the second part of the show. We're going to look at the quarterfinals. We're going to set up the semifinal at Wembley. But first of all, topical to start the show today, Duane. It finally happened 11 games into the Major League Soccer regular season. After a 7-1 defeat last night, Toronto FC have relieved Chris Armas of his duties.
Yeah, that's 7 bracket, SEVEN bracket, like back in the old newspaper days where they couldn't believe the score was what it was, so they had to spell it out for you so you know what it is. But if you were watching how TFC had been playing on the stretch, you weren't particularly surprised. You said finally happened, and it's funny because it's only 11 games into the regular season. 15 if you want to count the CCL games, but it did really feel like a finally for a lot of us because it just was so clear for the last, I'd say,
6 games, the six defeat in a row, of course, famously. But also, Duane, I want to draw your attention to the differential. Worst differential of the league, of course, that 7-1 does skew it a little bit, but not that much. Even without it, they would have the worst differential in the league right now. 13 goals for, 27 goals against.
Yeah, and what's the goals against, which is the real problem. And the fact that there's another stat that I'll give you, and they put it up on the screen minutes, like seconds before it became, a very scarce reality in terms of goals allowed in the first 15 minutes of games. Heading into last night, TFC had the most goals allowed in the first 15 minutes of the games by 2. 6 was their figure. 4 was the next highest. I believe Nashville was the next highest, believe it or not, which they were known for their tightness. But at any rate, that number is now 8. And it wasn't too long until it would have been a 9 if there was just a couple more minutes before DC scored their third last night. So
exactly. Oh, and it's not like it happened against Orlando or something. It's DC, right? And DC looked like a good team last night, but we'll get to it in a second. Looking at, of course, the overall aspect of this news. If we're looking at TFC side, here's the official statement. Toronto FC announced today that the club has relieved Chris Armas of his duties as head coach, effective immediately. Further details will be addressed at a 4 p.m. press conference with TFC President Bill Manning and General Manager Ali Curtis. That press conference did happen, and of course, Duane, some famous words were being said, saying, yes, of course, Chris Armas has been relieved of his duties, but Ali Curtis mentioned that he has to shoulder part of the blame in this one too.
Well, part. He made the hire and he stuck with him over the past. He gave him a vote of confidence less than a week and a half ago. Which the joke is that's
the kiss of death. But it's just like in the mafia movie. It's the kiss of death of the Godfather.
Yeah, look, I don't want to read too much into reading body language over, Zoom calls and stuff like that. But it did certainly seem like this. It was, if I could speculate based on what I've heard and seen, it did certainly seem that this was Manning forcing the issue tonight. And because Alex Curtis, bluntly, this was his man. They're buddies. They're friends. I don't want to be flippant about it, but that's the only way to do it. And not only that, Chris Armas is friends with Michael Bradley. So there's a lot of connections there at the right point. I was talking to someone today that point blank said that, look, Michael and Chris are tight. And so when you hear Michael give, a vote of confidence, you got to take that with a grain of salt because he's talking to his friend and you're always going to back your friend, right? But the reality is this just was clearly going sideways. And we were hearing obviously there's a high profile example of a divide in that dressing room. It's staring down our space, and we'll get to him in a minute. We're talking about Josie Altidore, obviously, and the fact that he's been training alone for a month. And this is a team that can't bloody score right now with their the DP level striker training by itself because of a spat that we don't even know. Now, what I've heard is that spat was a little more serious in the dressing room than the team was trying to let on, and that there was, it was a pretty hostile environment, and that it had come to a situation where, there's just not possible for them to get along in the same room. Now, look, Josie is a big personality, and that's a polite way to say that he's a pain in the ass. And he is. I think anyone who watches him play, or even if you're cheering for him, knows that he is a pain in the ass. And that can be fun if he's going well, but if you're coaching him, you can imagine it wouldn't be very fun sometimes. However, the reality is when you're struggling as bad as TFC is, and you have all of this money sitting in the bench, at some point you have to, live up to the title of your job, which is manage. You have to manage those personalities. That's part of it. Vanny and Josie didn't get along either, but Vanny was able to get the most out of Josie, particularly in the 2017 run to the title. Now, it's a very much more talented team, and a team that was, 4 years younger. So for a lot of these players, like Chris Mavinga was 4 years younger there, and that's a half-second speed, that little bit of turn, that quicker read, right? Like all that matters. But
Omar Gonzalez also has really aged quickly, apparently. But that's another story.
And look, I get that, and I get why people point to him, because he has never been that fast a foot, and he certainly has been looked like a vulnerability out there. But I look at the fact that he doesn't have any defensive midfielders in Armas' system as a bigger issue.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The system does not necessarily highlight his strength. It might actually expose his weaknesses.
Exactly. And there was an article, and I apologize, I forget the author's name, but it was an analytical article on MLS Soccer that came out last week. And it was what's wrong with TFC. And basically, using numbers, it demonstrated that Chris Armas took everything that TFC did well and took it away from them and changed them into a system that exposed every weakness they have. Like, how is that good management? Like, I'm a little less exasperated than I would have been had we been having this conversation and he had not been fired, because he's gone now, right? Like, obviously someone saw it. But it's just been so blatantly obvious that whatever they were trying to do, whether it was the right approach long-term or not, was not the right approach for this group of players they have right now. And they just stubbornly wouldn't change. And beyond that, every post-game conference, and I know that a bit of that's just, them performing, a bit of it. But at the same time, like, when they asked him last night, like, can you turn this around? He's like, well, I don't know what to do. And I don't think there's any coach in the world that would know what to do, but I'm going to figure it out. That was one of his answers. Like, what? I am the right person to fix this. Well, you were the one that broke it. Like, I don't want to urinate on his grave, as I tweeted it today. I don't. I wish him the best moving forward. I think Chris Armas probably, if he has some self-reflection in him, and this is one of my problems, as I just said, I don't think he does, but if someone can sit him down and force him to maybe think a little bit, I think he might realize that he is a very good assistant coach. And everyone I talked to that saw him work in New York as an assistant will back that up, that he was a very, very effective and good assistant coach. And you know what? That's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. You have a long and great career doing that. But his experience as a head coach both here and at New York tells us that, at least right now, he's terrible at it. He's amongst the worst managers that have ever managed in this league as a head coach.
Oh, yeah, he reminds me of an American version of Frank DeBoer a little bit. But, which actually doesn't, actually a very similar path over the last year. Speaking of, Chris Armas was fired in September by the New York Red Bulls. So, yeah, being relieved of his duties twice in not even a calendar year.
Yeah, and it's only the second time that's ever happened in MLS history, where our manager, Curtin Fafo, was the other manager that had this happen to him, was fired.
And by the way, the Galaxy were a terrible mess back then.
Yeah,
a couple of years ago with that hire.
Yeah, and it was Kansas City was the other team he was with, but yeah, so it's only happened once before. This is real historic stuff. Look, he again stubborn. Picks fight with man. Like, it's the same patterns. We've been over this on the show before. We haven't talked about it for a couple of weeks because we've been focused on the Euro. And had we been doing soccer today as normal, this would have been something we've been talking pretty much every day about, because at least it's been all I've been absorbed by.
Well, having a streak of 6 defeats in a row will do that to a club.
Yeah, it's the same.
Because it compounds, right? Every week it compounds to itself.
Yeah, and it's the exact same errors. You could go back to his time in New York and look at what they were complaining about. Stubborn on his tactics, non-responsive to questions in media, refuses to take any control, picking fights with star players. All of this stuff is the same. So he didn't learn from his time in New York. And what I found interesting about the New York Fire, if you look back, like the Red Bulls record last year wasn't horrific, not like Toronto's right now. And, maybe if you let him finish the season out, he probably is going to get a few wins just through dumb luck eventually. But the fact that New York saw enough in what they were seeing last year, and even though the record wasn't matching it, they knew what they were seeing, and they didn't like what they were seeing when they changed their direction a little bit there, and they got rid of him the second they could. And that's an organization in Red Bulls that isn't going to suffer fools, right? And they just got rid of him. And why he was hired in Toronto, look, Ali Curtis still has a job today, but I don't think it's a very long leash. And to go back to the press conference, if you were trying to read those body languages, like Bill Manning looked pissed in the press conference. He looked angry that he had to be sitting here 6 months after. And you think about it from his perspective, he is the business manager of Toronto FC that had to walk into MLSE headquarters as the head of this department and say, I'm going to need you to write a check for $1.5 million to get rid of a guy we hired 6 months ago. Like, I don't know what exactly would have been, but probably around that, because they would have had to pay out the rest of his contract, which was probably 2 years long left on it, right?
Which that's the case. They have to pay, unless he gets hired in the meantime, they have to pay the rest of his contract.
Yeah, and that's not something that's an expense that you don't anticipate. And if you are running MLSE on the like, if you're Larry Tannenbaum or you're the representatives for Bell and Rogers, you're going to ask questions. Why are we like this if it's 2 years, you can understand sports, stuff happens, but 6 months.
Yeah.
Like,
and
that's
go ahead.
Name it another time in any of the sports. Like as bad as the Leafs have been 10 years ago, especially, like they didn't have managers or coaches in that case for 6 months. No.
Well, usually it's an interim will stay that long whenever someone is actually named after a decent search. And I think it's quite ironic that happens the weekend where Crystal Palace announces Patrick Vieira as their manager, who was a candidate and actually turned down TFC in maybe 5 minutes to midnight back in the last off season.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone today that pushed back a bit on that. Suggested that the Vieira was mostly them planting noise. That they spoke to their representatives, but there was no intention to ever hire them. Like that, and I don't know how much of that's true. To be honest, it's only one source, and they went on to say that after the Vieira thing, they didn't interview anyone else. There was no one else that hit a formal interview stage for TFC, which is pretty bad too. They're just the suggestion being that there wasn't a search. Now, I'm gonna tell you all to take what I just said with a grain of salt, because again, it is one source, and I'll tell you that source is someone in the Ontario system. Is as far as I'll go with that, and part of that might be informed by their belief that TFC does not give fair look to local candidates for anything. So you always have to keep that in mind when you're talking to a TFC source. There's a little peek behind the curtain, but I'm inclined at this point to believe that the search was not as effective as it should have been, because I don't know how you can possibly have looked at his resume. We said this at the time. You can't have looked at his resume and gone, oh, he's our man. And then if you do that, then you have to believe that you've seen something that no one else is. And you can't be sitting there with your tail between your legs 6 months later firing him because, you're on a 6-game losing streak and just lost the worst loss in your club's history. You look like, yeah.
Oh, here, it's not just a 6-game losing streak, though. I think we have to look at it through the filter of the entire season, because I think that gives us maybe a better indication. 5 points after 11 games played in a regular season, 1 win, 8 losses, and 2 draws for a total, of course, of 5 points. They are the worst team in Major League Soccer right now, 14th in the Eastern Conference and 27th in the entire league. Only 213 goals scored, but of course 27 goals against. That's the worst record in the entire league. They have a 1-1 quote-unquote home record at Exploria Stadium in Orlando, and 0-6-1 away playing games in other stadiums. How much of the exile situation has affected Toronto's record if we look at it, which, of course, has happened also under Chris Armas' tenure?
Some, for sure. I mean, they haven't had a home game in a year and a half, really, and that hurts. But I will remind people that on Labor Day last year, they were in the Shield race. They were winning the Shield race with the same largely the same roster and the same circumstances. Now, I don't think it's completely fair to say that there isn't a greater burden mentally on having to do it a second year. I think that we're willing to accept a little bit of leeway when it comes to that. And had it not been like an absolute utter train wreck, which it was, and it has been for a month and a half, then I think we'd be maybe a little more forgiving here. I think Mark DeSantos still has a job because of the situation that we're talking about here, although I'm not too sure that's going to last much longer either.
Yeah, the only difference is this contract is not necessarily that. I think it ends at the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken. And will Vancouver even want to just pay two coaches for that long? Which you would think it's an easy question to answer, but if there's one thing we have seen over the years is not Vancouver spending a whole lot of money when they don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. They're different circumstances. That's the other thing about TFC too. Like, I mean, if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk, so to speak, right? And for 5 years, TFC has. They have been the big peacock in the playground that is puffing their chest out and saying that they're going to win trophies and that they're there to compete at a higher level than other MLS teams and they're going to spend money above everyone else. And you know what? They won a championship. They won a Shield. They won a couple of Voyageurs Cups. They went to 3 finals. Like, I mean, they were backing it up. They were the man. They were Ric Flairing it up, right? They were wearing that big robe and they were wooing all the way down. But right now they're, I don't know what a wrestling analogy to give here, but they're not walking. You can't talk the talk if you're not going to back it up. And now they're not.
They went from strutting to being shoulders down, looking at the lights.
Yeah, and look, you can't have the highest payroll in the league and have 5 points
and be dead last in the standings. That's literally what it is. The highest payroll in Major League Soccer is dead last in the standings.
And on the broadcast last night, for our Impact fans that were probably watching the Impact game, I hope you would have been anyway. You probably missed the TSN broadcast, but it was pretty telling. Like, both at the very end of the game, Greg Sutton, who was on the color commentary for the game, just like they're broadcast partners with them, so they have to be very careful. Neither him or Julian de Guzman, who we'll get to in a minute, outright said he should be fired. But if you were listening to what they were saying he should be fired. What Sutton said is that this team, like, they're just tactically a mess right now, and he was explaining how there were gaps and how they needed to just simplify things and take this down to the bare basics and just get the shape back and be prepared to not allow goals initially and to not have these gaps that were just appearing everywhere on the space. And I'm not a tactical expert. I'll never pretend to be one. But even I, as someone who just watches a lot of the games, can tell. Like, again, I said off the top of this thing, they weren't playing with a 6. For God's sakes, you're giving up all kinds of space, exposing your older, slower center halves. Put a friggin' defensive midfielder in front of them. Like, how hard is that? You have one of the best ones in the league historically there, and you've just pushed him further up the field, creating the damn space. Like, I don't have my UEFA A license, and I can see that.
Well, the thing is with my work, I have to look a lot at formations and other the team and have to get them right for the broadcast, right? Because I'm responsible for the ones. So when there's a mistake, it's my fault. But when I get it right, I get it right also. So you have to look at those formations. And right now, playing with one, but mostly 2 defensive midfield in front of your back line is pretty much a given around the league, even when you have teams playing a 4-3-3, which is becoming rarer and rarer in Major League Soccer. The 4-2-3-1, the 3-5-2, 3-4-3s are making their way throughout Major League Soccer as we speak, which inherently all have a sentinel or 2 defensive midfielder in front of the back line to protect the center backs.
Yeah, and TFC needs to play 4-2-3-1, period. It's obvious by their lineup. They've got, they've got a couple wingers that are doing okay. They've got, they can put, if Josie comes back, they got him up top. They've got Iowa. Otherwise, even Dwyer, they could put up top to be the single forward. You got Delgado, who's shown to be ineffective as part of the double pivot back there. And you've got Michael Bradley. It's a formation that makes, and obviously you're 10. You've got one of the best 10s in the league if you can utilize them. So it's a system that makes a lot of sense. So, get back to the base. Just dumb it down. And look, we don't know what exactly it's going to look like, how much change we're going to see in the immediate future in the games that will take place. They have to play Wednesday. I think that game will be stop the bleeding because they'll have 10 days to figure out that.
Exactly. And just to add to this right now, the interim will be taking charge by one of the assistants that was there. I had it in front of me. Go ahead.
Perez.
Exactly. Perez will be taking over for now, and that's how it's been described.
Yeah, and look, Nunez, the TFC2 coach, I was told by a couple of people was going to be the interim, and I had anticipated that all afternoon. In fact, I wanted to say it and had to back off it a bit when they announced Perez, but I think that there might be some other dominoes to fall here. And again, they got that little mini Gold Cup break. It's basically just a weekend off, but they have an extra 3 days off. The whole league does to figure it out. And I think that probably you'll see some pieces move around. Either Perez will permanently take on an interim tag for the rest of the year, or they'll bring Nunez in and have him, who's the TFC2 coach. And to do that, you have to have someone at TFC2, right? So you'd have to, like, in 2 days, it's very quick, and you just put an assistant in there to do it for one game.
Yeah, that's without looking at all the COVID aspect of this also, because you have to be in the bubble, or if you're not, there's testing and quarantine may be involved, and all those great, amazing things of this weird time that we live in.
Yeah, and look, the bottom line is, like, this isn't controversy at all. There cannot be anyone out there that doesn't think this was the right move. If you were on the fence last night, ended it, and all that's left to do now is to see what they can do. They have 23 games left. They are 11 points out of a playoff spot. More importantly, they are in dead last, as you said, which means that they would have to jump over 6 teams to get there.
And
you can't.
Yep.
I mean, it's highly unlikely is the way to put that. Like, it's not impossible, but it's high. They would need to play like 2 points per game.
Well, that's the thing. According to Frédéric Langerson on the broadcast of the Montreal game last night, they were also saying that TFC needs to have a 2-point average to be in a playoff position, depending of the battle at that point. That's where it hurts even more. Is DC got the 3 points last night, who will be a team battling for that 6, 7, 8 spot. So you're looking at a double whammy. It's not only the worst defeat in history, your coach is not only gone, it's a direct opponent getting another 3 points ahead of you.
Yeah, they just need to focus on getting some wins. And I don't think you worry about the playoffs at all. You just worry about getting points. And if you do get 2 points per game, what's that? You got 23 games left, so that would be 46 points on top of the 5 they have. So 51 points. 51 points would probably just sneak them in. And that tells you all you need to do. Normally, 2-point average is shield stuff. So they have to play shield-like football to just make the playoffs. And if they do that, then hell, it's all bets are off once the playoffs start if they get there. But
for 2/3 of a season. So they basically have to play like their record-breaking season for 2/3 of a season where they've played like their worst they have ever played. So
what they have to play is what they played like last year during the summer. So there you go.
Yeah, but on a longer
it's a few more games. It's similar length time, but yeah, I'm not saying it's possible, but not likely is the way to put it.
Yeah.
But more to the point, you have to turn it around and set yourself up for success down the line, because it's a fast moving world, and 2021 will be over soon enough, and 2022 will be staring you in the face. And
we're literally at the midpoint of 2021 as we speak, being July 4th of the recording of this just a couple of days ago was July 1st, and it's literally the midpoint of the year, which means, Duane, also the Euro is almost over. 48 games played, only 3 left, and we'll break down the potential final. Of course, right now we'll talk about the semis, but first we'll break down the quarterfinals right after this short break. You are listening to Euro Today with Duane Rollins and myself, Kev Laramee. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN. Subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube page, youtube.com/sports podcasting network. And we're back. Duane, it has gone by so quickly. From the first game on June 11th all the way to the final on July 11th right now. The quarterfinals have wrapped up. It's a couple days of no games in the Euro. We're all recuperating, and of course Tuesday starts the semifinal. But let's talk about the quarterfinals. 4 matchup took place earlier this week, of course, on Friday and Saturday. We had Switzerland against Spain on Friday with Belgium and Italy. The second game of the day, followed by the Czech Republic and Denmark on Saturday, and Ukraine and England. Let's start with the Swiss and the Spanish. Let's go chronologically. Of course, they did it again. Switzerland got to go to overtime, and they went to penalties, but at the end of the day, Jan Sommer used all the magic he had in his tank, and the Spanish are moving on to the semifinal, winning on penalties 1-3.
Yeah, it was really an atrocious penalty shootout by
everyone, but even Spain, from missing the frame to hitting the post to easy saves. It was not a clinic like the one against France.
Yeah, no, it wasn't very good at all. Look, Switzerland played very well. Kind of shut both of us up a little bit. We were making jokes about them all tournament, about 20th best and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, they are out. Spain's a funny little animal here. My pre-tournament pick to win in the semifinals, so I'm gonna take a half victory for that. But I don't know if they've convinced anyone. But at the same time, you know, they still are winning, so you can't count them out. And it's been a funny little.
Sorry, Duane, you're right. I was just going to say, isn't that how they do it? Isn't that like the exact Spanish way where they never impress us? Remember, we used to blame Fernando Torres for not scoring. Then he ends up scoring the goals when it counts.
You know, they used to win every game 1-0 back then, yeah. They'd have 735,000 passes completed, and they'd win 1-0. People remember tiki-taka. Tiki-taka has this vision of, in your mind of, artistry and joy on the field, but it's really just a smothering control technique that is ultimately more defensive than it is attacking based, because if you have the ball, you can't be scored on. That's the general premise, right? And, obviously they're trying to open you up, but 1-0 is fine. They still are very much, they're not quite the same level as they were back then, but look, any of the 4 teams left, I would give a chance to. I mean, the Danes are outsiders for sure, but they obviously have the narrative going for them. And, to get back to Spain, look, Italy's going to be favored in that game, but if anyone's going to beat them, I can't see England beating them. I can't see Denmark beating them, but I could see Spain beating them. And then I could see the other two beating Spain, right? That's...
It's true. Sometimes it's easier to beat a team that just passes all the time with just like a random moment of brilliance like Raheem Sterling can have.
Yeah, we'll talk about England at the end here, but just to finish off with, good tournament for Switzerland. We'll say that. They've got to be happy with that, and very, proud that they were able to get to a higher point than they have in their history, which speaks to our jokes, right? That they did take that one extra step, and that's an important thing for any program. And we're so close to Qatar now that having a little bit of confidence might give them a chance to build upon that very quickly. But
you're right. And for me, Switzerland has not only beaten France, they turned France into turmoil because now the parents of players are arguing in the stands. It's not going well at all, this loss for the French national team.
I was listening to Football Ramble, and they called France the oasis of international football teams, and the fact that when they're good, they're very, very good, and they're out playing, Wonderwall, and everyone's loving them. But then when they get bickering and fighting, they're just a complete disaster.
Then one thing happens, one person gets mad, and then the whole thing breaks down.
Yeah, exactly. So the Oasis is having a bit of a tiff right now.
Who's Noel Gallagher? I'm gonna put $2 on Rabiot's mother.
There you go. Yeah, so good for Switzerland, but yeah, Spain. Look, they're in a semifinal mid tournament. I think that unless you are the hyper elite, which are your Germanys, your the teams that win, then making the semifinals is successful. And I wouldn't actually put Switzerland or Sweden. Let's try this for a third time. The other S, Spain. I don't think that they are at that level yet. They're not one of the global historical elite teams. There's only 4 or 5 of those, and they're not quite there. So making a semifinal is success, and especially now it doesn't seem like the same. Well, it's not the same decade exactly, but it doesn't seem within the same 10-year period. But really, they are just 10 years removed from those super teams, and they're back at a semifinal in the Euro. So that tells you that everything's just fine in Spain, despite what you might hear otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And a Euro where you do have a lot of high-end team, especially when you're looking at the top 10 teams in the world and top 6. You had like 5 European teams in there. Just Brazil out of nowhere is third in the world. The rest is just Europe, right? So it's a very heavy European landscape in the world of football. And we're seeing big contenders, even if the fact that a lot of them are out. When you think about it, right now in the quarterfinals, we had Spain and Belgium, Italy, and England, and the emerging country of Czech Republic and Denmark. Let's not discount what the Czechs have done in this tournament and even before and in qualification. That's another thing we forgot, is to look at the qualifying rounds and how teams become better teams. Just look at Italy. They got their confidence in that run, 31 game unbeaten at this point. Before conceding against Austria, they hadn't conceded in over 10 games, over 1,000 minutes without goals, but this Italy national team is the darling of international football for the last couple of years. They have been unbeatable, and now beating big teams on a big stage. 2-1 Italy, Belgium. In Munich, Italy got it done, and some of it with class. And some, like Immobile, with a little bit of controversy, playing dead and then running to celebrate.
Yeah, he should have got a yellow for that.
Yeah, it should have.
That's you don't wave the goal off or anything like that, but I think it's pretty clear that it's an embellishment at that point, and you could give him a yellow card. But it's not the only team in the world that does it. The Italians, culturally speaking, are a little more accepting of that kind of tactic, and that's all different all over the world, what you think about embellishment. And we need to be careful to not be Western-centric and North American-centric.
Have you watched a basketball game lately? Don't tell me there's no embellishment.
Or hockey.
Or hockey, right? Even football. Football, yeah. Like, the guy actually got hit by a train, so maybe he's not faking it.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so let's not dwell on that too much, because what we should be dwelling on when it comes to Italy is just how damn good they are. I tweeted out after that game that, first off, I think it's pretty clear that they are the overwhelming favorite to win this tournament. We could sing about coming home and all that stuff.
I was going to say, we can think about coming home, but coming home means mangi alla casa.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to upset the Italians if it's coming home. And the Euro is going through them. That's the bottom line. And, if Spain can take them out, we're having a different conversation for the final. But they are far and away the best team in the world right now. And Belgium was the number 1 ranked team in the world, but Italy is the team that is playing the best in the world right now. And it's remarkable what Mancini has done in 3 years. I would go so far as to say that if you have to make an early handicap for 2022 for the World Cup, that the Italians have favorite.
They're playing a system. They have a system. They're not just a bunch of players together. The way he selects his players has coherence to me, right? There's a way he likes to play, and that's the international game. You don't have to overcomplicate it, and you have to basically just execute and find ways to give players a relevance and make players that you don't pick still feel part of this program, right? That's the building of the identity of that national team is done over the qualifying rounds, and you don't select always the same players. You need an evolution, and you need a direction, things that need vision. And I think that's what Roberto Mancini brought to this Italian team, is a vision going forward with a generation that is blooming at this point. Locatelli, Chiesa, also Pessina, and we're seeing, of course, some other great players like Insigne, Immobile. Insigne bringing that character, Immobile bringing that class, finesse finish that we can see. Of course, Insigne scored, of course, another amazing goal too in this one, which is a world-class goal, maybe the second nicest goal in this tournament after Patrick Schick's midfield glorious curler. But to me, Italy, like you mentioned, are not only the favorite here, they're doing it in a beautiful way. They are beautiful to watch in that system of Mancini.
Yeah, and look, Roberto Mancini is a manager, is obviously a player that when I was a little boy, I can remember him as a player, because #old. But he's as a manager, has been a guy that I'm quite familiar with because of his association with Manchester City. And not only was associated with Manchester City, he was the manager for Aguero, right, for the 2012 when they finally broke through. And if you look at the players that he managed in that team and players that he's managed throughout his career, one thing that he's been very good at, exceptionally good at, he knows his tactics. That's no doubt. Like, he's a legit manager. Like, he was a star player in his day, but he became a star manager too.
Yeah.
But what he's really good at is man management, and he's especially good at man managing challenging personalities
like Mario Balotelli in 2013,
and Yaya Toure, and there's a lot of guys that have a lot of personality that he has done. Mario's a good example, and look, Mario ultimately became, for various reasons, he became the shooting star that exploded, and his talent was never fully reached, but his talent was as close to being reached at any time in his career during those few years at City, and that during that Euro that he was involved with in Italy, where he was really starting to flourish. And Mancini had such a huge part in shaping him at that time and keeping him in his guidance. He's good with young guys. He's good with young players. They all respect him and they respond to him. And I have a lot of time for Roberto Mancini as a manager, and he's a big reason why this program is firing on all cylinders right now. But there's not much more to say about Italy that we haven't already said, that they are. It is difficult to see how they lose. Belgium, I think, had the best chance to do it. And they did ultimately come short again. I think that the injuries did play a big role for Belgium this time. Kevin De Bruyne came out after to say that he was playing on a partially torn Achilles, which,
yikes.
Wonderful.
What a terrible few weeks for him. First of all, he gets his face all busted up in the Champions League final, and then in his return game, or was it the second game? Was it his start? Yeah, it was his the third game of the tournament. Where he started for Belgium, and he tore half of his Achilles tendon, which, by the way, Spinazzola has a torn Achilles tendon and will be out for a while. It's a shame because he was actually going to benefit from his amazing performance in this tournament. Might have been one of the best players in the Euro so far, and now he gets a busted up Achilles, and he's going to have a lot of rehab. Unfortunately, an injury-prone career that this time around might actually cost him a very lucrative contract somewhere. Yeah,
it's unfortunate. De Bruyne, we'll have more conversations about him in about 4 weeks' time when we're talking about the start of the Premier League. But I think that it's probably likely that he's going to need to sit down for a while. And this has been a very good tournament. It has been, and that surprises me. I did not think it would be going in. I had a feeling this might be a complete bust of a tournament. I wasn't alone in that. It turns out that the desire, the passion to play at this level, and maybe the lack of international football over the past year and a half maybe gave a little more hunger than normal, has made this to be quite a compelling tournament. Otherwise, I'm very much enjoying it. And the fact there's only 3 games left in it is kind of disappointing in a way.
It's always sad. It's the end of like the Olympics, the end of a tournament like this. It's always the same. But we have an Olympics soon, so maybe we're just going to have to just shift gears. But
just to say, I got my Olympics coming up, so my mind, I'm already thinking how we're going to work that. But at any rate, we'll have conversations about that.
Yeah, that should be a lot easier than we think, because there's not a whole lot of Euros gone too. So I just do see if Montreal now, so not too bad.
Have to figure the sleep schedule out, and we'll be fine.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Thank you.
They're gonna flip it around. It's the same as Beijing. Do you remember Beijing?
Oh yeah. 12 hours.
Beijing, most of the main stuff was in the evenings for us, so they just flipped their schedule over there. So the primetime events, like your finals, were in the mornings, local time, and they're their evenings in the big TV markets. Anyway.
It's actually great for the athlete, because when I was competing on like badminton or soccer, I always loved to play in the morning.
Yeah, as long as they adjust for it, they're fine. And I think because of the heat, a lot of like our friend Evan Dumpy, the race walker, if you don't know, we're buddies. We have an Olympic gold medal potential guy that we have followed for a few years that we're all cheering for here.
Yeah. He knows of us. He's been on our show twice. So.
Yeah, more than twice actually. But anyway,
3 times. Yeah, it's true. Right, but
they're going off at midnight or something. Like, it's like the times are all over the map. But anyway, we'll figure that out. And obviously, we have a women's soccer tournament that we'll talk a lot about on soccer day.
And even a men's soccer tournament, but we won't have Canada, of course, in that tournament. Neither the U.S. exactly. Yeah, Mexico is going to win it all, though.
Perhaps, yeah. And they have won it all before.
Exactly.
We have a Gold Cup coming up next week too, Kevin. Did you know that?
Yeah, I figured that out. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a Gold Cup, but let's finish talking about the Euro for today.
Yeah, I guess we're not done yet, are we?
The second round of the quarterfinals, Czech Republic, Denmark. The Danes with the big victory. Patrick Schick had to score another one for sure, for a good measure. But the Czech bow out in the quarterfinals. Great performance by the Czech Republic in this one, showing a good side of this team, showing that it's not about necessarily the big names and the big glitz, but again, showing that a team aspect makes a big difference. Organization, having an informed striker, and just having a proper group and bracket, you can find a way to the quarterfinals. But the Danes, the feel-good story of this tournament, Kasper Hulman, best manager of this tournament, finding a way to make Denmark look great without Christensen. And at this point, now that he's okay, now that he's great, it might have been a blessing in disguise tactically to have Christensen out, because then they cannot just suffocate the service of Christensen, because then there's a ton of Christensen in the team. It's all about a great team concept, and the performance of Male has been, of course, wonderful in this one.
Yeah. Look, I mean, hashtag narrative. When Christian Eriksen went down in the early round, it was difficult to see how they could come back from that, particularly after they lost the second game. But since then, they got it done. Now, look, in the second half against the Czech Republic, we saw, first off, a nice recovery by the Czechs. But second off, you saw, it's a good team, this Danish team is, and it's a team playing for something. I mean, maybe even more than others at this point, and that's obviously going to have an edge for them. But they aren't. When we're at this deep in a tournament, they're going to have to play a full game if they're going to get past England, and an English team that hasn't allowed a goal yet. So it's going to be a much bigger challenge for them in the next round. But
the only team left that hasn't allowed a goal, because Italy has allowed a couple, and you're right. We'll get to England in a second. Which, yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, look. Denmark was the slight favorite heading into that game, and I think that they were the slightly better team in the game. And it was the one quarterfinal matchup that was probably a step below the rest in terms of not having an elite team in it. And yes, I'm calling England an elite team. They've been to back-to-back semifinals of major tournaments at this point now. I don't think you can deny the fact that they are a contending team.
They haven't a lot of gold now yet, and they only have potentially 2 games left to play out of 7.
Yeah, and you can be as angry about that as you want. There's as many people out there that hate England as there are that love England, and there's a lot of people that feel that the English are overhyped in a lot of tournaments, and they'd be correct in a lot of tournaments, but they're not being overhyped in this tournament, and they're proving it. In fact, they might have been underhyped a little bit in this tournament, to be blunt, because I picked them to not even make it out of the first round, I believe. So there you go. I was being funny, but nonetheless, I should probably not be funny in my predictions, just actually make predictions alone.
Yeah, because England might win it all. And that wouldn't be too shocking. They were on the easier side of the draw, you would say, but looking at who won on the other side, wasn't really easy after all. I guess they're all taking each other out, but Germany, of course, famously on England's side, has been maybe England's best victory. Let's move to England now. Ukraine, England, 4-0 for the Three Lions in Rome. King of Rome for a night, coming back home, playing at Wembley for the last potential 2 games, for sure one. They're going to play the Danes in a semifinal match at the home of football.
Yes, sadly, no third-place game. I love third-place games.
I love the fact that there's no third-place game at the Euro.
Yeah, well, because you get the day out. You don't have to work it. That's why.
Yeah, because I don't have to work it, and it means nothing. No one remembers who finished third of the World Cup in whichever World Cup it was.
I disagree, but it depends who finishes third. When the Croatia finished third, when Turkey finished third, it mattered to them. However, I get it from the major country's perspective. It's a very strange little concept. But
imagine if someone plays, example, for the Stanley Cup, you just lost a semifinal, like, oh, okay, you're going to have a playoff now to see who wins, finishes third. Like, no, heck no. Let's just put both of us finishes third. There's no finish fourth, and you move on with your life.
Yeah, well,
just like judo.
The Olympics. I watched the Olympics, and there's bronze medal games in the Olympics. So
yeah, but there's a medal. There's something to give. They don't give out any trophies after winning the third place.
Well, they do get a medal. They get the third place medal.
They get a medal. Damn it.
I like the third place game. It's a hill I will die on. However, there is not a third place game in the Euro, so you don't have to worry about it. We can have this conversation in 18 months where there will be a third place game in the World Cup because FIFA likes its sponsorship money and there is going to be money attached to it. However, there's not much to say about this damn game. England, they just dominated it from start to finish. Ukraine maybe was probably the weakest team left, and England just dispatched them and did it in a sort of workmanlike way that you didn't expect of them. Because if you followed England for a long time, you view them as being team drama, team choke, team can't get it done when everyone says they are. But what they did is they just went out and got it done, and they did it with some style, and it was probably there was no probably about it. It was their most complete performance of the tournament. So, you got to give them full credit. Now,
they're getting better with each game. And
a lot of goal.
Exactly. They're having a lot of goal defensively. And offensively, they are progressing from the difficulties to find opportunities to score, which indeed was maybe because of the tactics used by Southgate in a positive way. It is important for this type of team in this type of tournament to not expose itself to the strong offensive capabilities of other team. Once you got that pat down, you can find ways to progress, and slowly over this tournament they have. And when an opportunity came against a team like Ukraine where you can open up and trust your own defense, it's not like you need to practice your system as much. You can actually open up a bit more, and we've seen that. But even then, it took the second half of that to happen. Let's not forget, it was a quick goal, and then we're all sleeping for 40-something minutes. And then the second half, and then the floodgate of Southgate opened.
For sure. A couple things with England that I think people need to realize is that about 10 years ago, the English FA decided to back off the hyperbole about, football coming home and all those jokes aside. They backed it a little bit off and they said, our results don't match what we think we should be. And instead of just complaining that, this should be our game or whatever, we should do something about it. And they addressed it at the FA level, and they addressed it particularly at the youth level. And if you look at England's result at the Euro under 21s, at the the FIFA under 20s, the under 17s, that stuff, prior to a decade or so ago, they really gave them no attention. They didn't put good teams in. They wouldn't go to World Cups. They didn't do anything. Well, they've been putting attention in it, and they've won a European under 21 title. They've won a World under 17 cup. They've been successful at the youth level. Southgate was involved in some of those teams, and as much as there's only a few players or a couple players here and there that might have had a bit of a direct attention to it, it's sort of, I think, signaled that on some symbolic, emotional way that England could compete and could win these tournaments and should be doing that. And, it matched what the other big countries do. Because that was always the funny thing about it. Like, when you talk about the youth level results, they don't matter, you might say. Well, Spain friggin' wins half of them. So they clearly think it matters. Germany wins a lot of them. They clearly think it matters. And I think by putting that winning mentality at the FA level across the board has really led to this point that we are now seeing England probably not, living up to their potential is one way to say it. I think they're actually probably surpassing them when you look at their size of the country realistically. Like, Soccernomics touches on this, that England, this probably is their level. But because it is a dominant culture there, it is a huge part of it, and they do have such a great league that they should be able to rise up and compete every so often. So I think that there really is something to say about this. And, there is no fluke here. They haven't allowed a goal. Right now, if you were objectively looking at this, you would say that the final is most likely going to be Italy versus England. That is the most logical thing that we could say from here. Now, upsets can happen, and it's been a strange tournament, but that is the most logical outcome. And the funny thing about it is if we go into an Italy-England thing, roles are completely reversed historically from what we'd normally expect from those two teams, right? Italy is the team that's going to be open, that's going to be playing dynamic, and England is the team that's going to be playing defensive and very solid. So that's going to be an interesting final there if that happens. But look, it was funny. I watched the England game, Kevin, with a bunch of English fans yesterday, and even their reaction to this point is almost like disbelief because they're not used to it. They're not used to being successful and not successful in the way that they were yesterday, which says something about how they have this team playing. they're not going to light it up, but they aren't going. They're going to be competitive. I can't see the Danes beating them, to be honest. Like, narrative's not going to take them so far. Is football coming home? I don't know.
Well, the semifinals at home, and so is the final. Will England be part of it? That's the question.
I am going to sit here and say right now that I think England will be playing in its first major final since 1966 on July 11th.
And then the ball is around and all.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens.
Italy, England, our predicted final. I agree with you also. I do believe Italy will get it done against Spain in the first semifinal. And, of course, in the second one, we will have at Wembley, we will have England being the host of Denmark, not only figuratively, but also in the dressing room. Also, in all aspect of this game, England is considered the host, and that does change something because you're actually going to be in your national team locker room at Wembley for your 301st international game of the Three Lions at Wembley. Start a new century, a centurion of game with a victory, and you're going to play for the trophy, for the Henri de Julien trophy.
Yeah, and
Delaney. I said de Julien. It's Delaney. Henri Delaney trophy, which sadly he created that tournament and died 5 years before the first game.
Look, it's been a great tournament, and you look at the potential final matchups, and it's hard to not see a great story for any of them. I mean, maybe, Denmark, Spain might not be what anyone wants, but you'd have the great story of Denmark in there, right? England could be in its first major final since 1966. This Italian team has been great to watch. Spain. It's going to be a good final regardless, and it's been a good tournament, and I've enjoyed talking about it here, and I'm going to enjoy when we get back to soccer today on a more regular basis, and we'll let you know what the schedule is going to be for next week, but certainly a couple weeks from now we'll be back to normal.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that too, because Chris Armas is gone, and that's also something that I don't like the people to lose their job, but I'm not going to lie.
Exactly. He's going to be fine. His contract is still for another 2.5 years. So
he's going to be able to eat. Don't worry about him that way. Got to say, it felt like a 10-pound weight was there. 200-pound weight was taken on my back when I read that press release because I just was sick of being angry at him. So there we go.
Yeah, he is pretty muscly, right? So 200 pounds might fit the profile. On that note, we'll be back soon with another edition of Euro/Soccer Today. And until then, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kev Laramee. As always, until next time, have a great soccer.